All right, let's get right into it. World War II, it wasn't just another war. It was a global fire that burned down the old world, and from the ashes built the one we live in right now. We're going to break down how the end of that war was really the beginning of, well, almost everything. Picture this. It's 8:15 in the morning, a totally normal day. People are commuting to work, kids are on their way to school. It's just another Tuesday. Until, in a flash, it wasn't. With just one weapon, an entire city was practically erased. The heat at the epicenter hit almost 4,000 degrees Celsius. This was it. The terrifying, unbelievable power of the atomic bomb shown to the world for the very first time. And if you can believe it, just 3 days later, another one fell on Nagasaki. That was it. Japan surrendered. The Second World War was finally over. But this wasn't just some neat and tidy ending. No, this was the violent birth of a brand new age. So to really get a grip on the world that came after the war, we have to look back. We have to ask, how on earth did humanity get to a point where this level of destruction was even possible? The truth is, World War II didn't just pop up out of nowhere. You can trace its roots right back to the end of the First World War. It was like a fire that was never really put out, just left smoldering under the surface. And you can just see the dominoes falling, one after another. First, the Treaty of Versailles hits Germany with these humiliating terms and crippling debt. Then, boom, the Great Depression wrecks the global economy, which just creates the perfect breeding ground for extremist leaders like Hitler, who promised to make Germany strong again. So as war erupted, the world basically split in two. You had the Axis powers on one side, driven by conquest, and on the other, the Allied powers, a huge coalition that came together to stop them. But here's the thing that made this war so fundamentally different, so much more terrifying than anything that had come before. It wasn't just about soldiers fighting soldiers. This was a war against everyone. So you have to understand this concept called total war. It means everything is part of the war effort. Your factories, your farms, your science labs, and your cities. The line between the battlefield and the home front, it was completely erased. Civilians weren't just unfortunate casualties anymore. They were strategic targets. The final human toll, it's a number so big it's hard to even wrap your head around it. Roughly 70 million people died. To this day, it's the deadliest conflict in the entire history of humanity. But, and this is the part that is so crucial to understand, of those 70 million dead, an absolutely staggering 50 million were civilians. Yeah, just look at this chart. It really puts it into perspective. Over 2/3 of the people killed were not soldiers. They were mothers, fathers, children, ordinary people just trying to survive in a world gone mad. That is the legacy of total war. And the horror wasn't just from bombs. Far away from the front lines in Europe, in British-ruled India, the war's demands created a nightmare. Food from the region of Bengal was taken to feed troops, which triggered a famine that killed about 3 million people. They weren't killed by an enemy bullet, they were victims of the war's insatiable appetite. So all this death and destruction, it did more than just end lives. It completely shattered the old world order. The great powers of Europe were left in ruins, and out of that rubble, a new world began to take shape. After World War I, they created the League of Nations to try and prevent another disaster. And, well, it was a spectacular failure. So this time they tried again. In 1945, the United Nations was born, designed to be stronger, with a Security Council that could actually take action. It was a direct attempt to not repeat the mistakes of the past. Before the war, the globe was dominated by massive colonial empires, Great Britain and France. But the war bled them dry. Their economies were shattered. And when the smoke cleared, there were really only two nations left with the industrial and military power to call the shots: the United States and the Soviet Union. But here's the twist. These two new superpowers were ideological enemies, capitalism versus communism. So instead of a new era of peace, the world was immediately plunged into a new, terrifying conflict, the Cold War, a 45-year standoff under the constant shadow of nuclear war. At the very same time, another huge change was underway. The war had fatally wounded those old European empires, and the millions of people living under their rule, they saw their chance for freedom. Just look at India, the so-called jewel in the crown of the British Empire. Millions of Indians were forced to fight for Britain. The war drained India's resources and led to that horrific famine. By the end, Britain was just too broken and too broke to hold on. The Indian independence movement was too strong. And just 2 years after the war, India was finally independent. And this wasn't just an isolated case. Oh no, it was a chain reaction all across the globe. The war was the catalyst that ignited independence movements everywhere. The centuries-long era of European colonial empires was finally and decisively over. So when you look around, from the United Nations to the Cold War rivalry that shaped generations, to the map of the world itself, it was all born from this conflict. It created institutions designed to stop another world war, but it also gave us the weapons to destroy ourselves completely. Which leaves us with a pretty heavy question, doesn't it? Did we really